Hello, noble ones. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today's topic is slavery. So I found this channel called Parabellum, 62,000 subscribers, and they made a video called "How much did Roman slaves cost?" Now, I've seen several channels and videos tackle the way slavery worked in classical antiquity, specifically ancient Rome, but I never really saw anyone ask this direct question, which I do appreciate. So hopefully the video is good. I will try not to interrupt him too much, but at the same time, when I do my React videos, I always try to make them as transformative as possible because I don't want to just sit down like some YouTubers do and just let him talk for 15 minutes and say nothing. I'll try to find a sweet spot, so thank you for your patience, and let's go.
Imagine a slave market at the Forum Borarium in Rome. The auctioneer shouts, "Greek boy, 12 years old, can read and write. Starting bid, 1,500 denarii. Who's going higher?" Chalk on his feet marks him as newly arrived. Next to him stands a worn-out Thracian farmhand going for just 500. On the platform, a young Syrian woman, her beauty alone priced at 6,000. So how did the Romans put a price on a human life?
All right, so he's starting strong. He's really starting strong. Note how the Greek boy was priced very high. In general, Greek slaves, whether it be boy, girl, man, woman, doesn't really matter. As long as you're Greek, that's one of the most sought-after type of slave in the Roman world. And the sources do mention the reasons. One is, of course, his ability to read and write. But most importantly, Greeks speak Greek, which means they can teach your kids, even if you're a middle class, if you can afford one, middle to upper class, and you can afford a Greek slave. From the Roman perspective, it's good because one, the Greek slave can now teach Greek to your kids. You know how important that would be in ancient Rome. And two, it makes you look more affluent. Sometimes the Romans even went as far as giving Greek names to slaves that weren't Greeks just to show off.
What affected those prices, and how do these amounts compare to modern money? Let's break it down.
Please.
Slave markets were the beating heart of Rome's slave trade. People were bought and sold as casually as we buy a new phone today. And just like us, the Romans loved paperwork. Every sale came with a contract, receipts for the money, and written proof of delivery, not of goods, but of people.
From their point of view, they are goods. I know this sounds horrible, but just to give you the perspective of the period, the Romans tell us in their sources that a slave is a, open quotes, talking tool, close quotes.
Because of that, we now have a window into the brutal everyday reality of slavery in the Roman world. Slavery was part of Roman life from the city's beginning to the fall of the Western Empire. Naturally, prices changed over time, rising and falling with wars, the economy, and shifts in society. In this video, we're focusing on a specific stretch of time, from the 1st century BC to the 2nd century AD. Why this period? Because it's simply the one we know the most about. Take the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum, a massive collection of all known Latin inscriptions. It spans 17 volumes, and 16 of them come from the imperial period. The same goes for literature. About 90% of surviving Roman texts were written during this era. Even famous authors from the Republic like Cicero, Caesar, and Lucretius were active in its final years. Altogether, over 90% of our sources on ancient Rome come from just the last 40% of its history. So it's no surprise that this is the period most historians rely on. But it's not just about having more records. This was also the peak of Roman slavery.
Absolutely.
After Caesar's campaigns, the markets were flooded with hundreds of thousands of captives, and at the same time, the Roman economy was still relatively stable. That's what sets this period apart from later centuries, which saw rising inflation and a collapsing currency. It's during this window that we get the clearest picture of how the Roman slave market really worked, with consistent prices, clear standards, and a fully developed system.
I wish that people who draw anything that has to do with the classical period would start to put the correct colors, because all of these white temples, white structures, white columns, white statues, they would have instead all have been in full color. Red and green columns and blue and yellow. This is what we would have seen. And I'm from the Mediterranean, so I enjoy the idea of Mediterranean polychromatic culture to be correctly represented. With that being said, talking about color, did you notice that a lot of these slaves are white? The Romans didn't slave based on ethnicity at that time, which means that the Romans weren't racists. They hated everyone equally. Who wasn't Roman. And so, yeah, this guy who's blonde, in fact, from the point of view of the Romans, would he be considered a white guy? No, because the Romans actually used the term white to refer to themselves. They refer to the Nordic type as blondes, and then they call black people Ethiopians. That's what they call them, even those that are not from Ethiopia. It's kind of a general term. It's because it comes from the Greek burnt face. With that being said, someone who was blonde like this, clearly probably a Gaul, I imagine in this case, or from a Germanic tribe, so either Celtic side or Germanic side. Usually this is a typical phenotypic trait, and to the Romans this would have been a blonde, like they actually called them as a category of people.
Put simply, this 250-year stretch is ideal for study. It gives us a wealth of sources and a fully developed slave market to examine. So what determined whether a slave was priced at 500 or 5,000 denarii? The Romans approached this with cold, calculated logic.
Yeah.
They valued people the way they value livestock. The first thing that affected a slave's price was their origin. Romans held strong, often stereotypical views about different ethnic groups. Greeks, for example, were seen as cultured, educated, and intelligent. They were also thought to be less likely to run away or rebel, which made them highly sought after. Greek slaves were typically used for household duties, childcare, or as personal assistants and secretaries.
Yes.
Gauls and Germans were valued for their physical strength and toughness, which made them ideal for gladiator training. Gauls had a reputation for being rebellious, while Germans were seen as loyal to their masters. They were often bought specifically for hard labor, farming, construction, mining, or even as personal bodyguards, especially if they had gladiatorial experience.
Yeah, in fact, after some of the most successful gladiators, of course, we know that some get freed, right? That's one of the things they can do, but others get employed by aristocrats and people with money. They're like, oh, that guy really knows how to fight. He's big, he's imposing, he's scary. I want him to defend me, or I want him to defend my children. Like, that's something the Romans did. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.
Slaves from the East were viewed differently. Syrians, Phoenicians, and Judeans were considered skilled in crafts, money lending, and trade. They were often thought of as clever and shrewd in business. Because of that, they were frequently purchased to manage estates or oversee profitable businesses on behalf of their owners. Slaves from newly conquered territories were usually cheaper, but that changed as those regions became more Romanized. Once the locals started speaking Latin, learned to read and write, and adopted Roman customs, their market value went up.
Right, but someone who, if by that time you wouldn't be enslaved anymore unless there is a secondary reason, because sometimes there are, like, debt is one way by which even citizen may end up in slavery. It's very rare with citizens, but it's at least they might decide to go into the gladiatorial realm by their decision rather than being enslaved or turned into slaves.
Another major factor was skill and education.
Yes.
Unskilled laborers were at the bottom of this price range, while slaves with valuable trades, literacy, or a classical education, especially those fluent in Latin and other languages, were worth much more. A basic slave with no special talents might just go for a few hundred denarii, but a skilled craftsman could fetch,
denarii.
10 times that. Pliny the Younger mentions a shoemaker who was sold for 4,000 denarii. For comparison, a regular legionary at the time earned about 20 denarii a month. Intellectual professions were valued even higher. There are accounts of a Greek grammarian being sold for 10,000 denarii and a doctor for 20,000, about the cost of a small house in Rome. The poet Martial writes about a cook who specialized in exotic recipes. He sold for a jaw-dropping 100,000 denarii, the price of a full country estate.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane. It's like, who the heck is he? Gordonicus Ramseius. That's who that is. A lot of red tunics here. We might talk about tunics and colors later, we'll see.
And a talented Greek actor named Panurgus reportedly sold for an astonishing 700,000 denarii. Slaves like that weren't just hired help, they were status symbols, bought to show off wealth, sophistication, and taste.
Yep.
The third major factor was age. Slaves between 15 and 25 were the most expensive, old enough to work hard, young enough to last for decades. Children were more of a gamble. Infants and toddlers were often sold cheaply, sometimes even given away for free with their mothers, since there was no guarantee that they would survive.
Right.
But once a child reached around 10, their price started to rise. Romans saw them as a good investment, young, easy to train, and already capable of helping out. Wealthy families would sometimes buy children to raise alongside their own as companions for their sons and daughters. These vernae, or homeborn slaves, were especially prized for their loyalty. After 25, a slave's value began
Of course, because that's everything. That's all they've ever known. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
decline. By the age of 40, they might be worth only half of what they would have fetched in their prime. After 50, a slave was considered old and only valuable if they had specialized skills. Many elderly slaves were simply freed, not out of kindness, but to avoid the cost of feeding and housing them. If they were sold at all, it was often for a token amount. We even have records of 60-year-old slaves being sold for as little as 100 denarii, or less. That said, there were exceptions. An experienced doctor or teacher could still bring in a decent price thanks to their knowledge. A trusted estate manager who knew all the inner workings of a household could remain useful well into old age. But for most slaves, getting older meant simply becoming invisible, and expendable at that.
Absolutely. Pretty good video so far. I'm going to skip the central part just to give an opportunity for those who like this to see it as a demo of the original creator. So then you can go, give him a like, leave him a comment, and perhaps finish watching the video on their channel. But I do want to see this final part to hear their conclusions. Oh, they're doing it for the years of service. That's actually interesting. Let's see.
Slave prices. An average male slave with no special skills went for about 1,000 denarii, just a little more than a year's salary for a legionary.
Yeah.
That kind of money could also buy you a small shop in the suburbs of Rome. A skilled slave trained in a trade might cost around 3,000 denarii. A legionary would have to serve for 3.5 years just to afford one. An attractive young woman priced at 6,000 denarii. That's nearly 7 years of a soldier's pay. For the same amount, you can buy a modest villa outside of the city.
Yeah, I would like to underline, though, the pay of the legionaries changes dramatically the further forward you go in time and depending on the emperor in charge. So this is just an approximation. Also, cool drawing. The sword should be on the right, though. That's because he's clearly not an officer. So the sword should be on the right side.
A slave physician could sell for 20,000 denarii, the price of a luxurious estate.
Unless you're an officer.
These numbers are staggering, but behind each one was a real person, a child ripped from their family, a craftsman forced to serve a new master, a woman sold into a brothel. The slave market was cold, calculated, and brutally efficient, and it never stopped. It adapted, expanded, and lasted for over 1,000 years.
Yeah, slavery is it's very recent. It really is very recent, the abolition of slavery. And the reality is that it probably goes... I mean, for the Romans, it's the most sophisticated and well-organized because the Romans were more efficient at anything. Whether it be good things, whether it be bad things, the efficiency remains. But slavery and taking people as slaves is something that would probably go back to the Paleolithic, I'll be honest with you. Anyways, very good video. I appreciated it. I'll probably watch more. And thank you for watching. And you will find links in the description and pinned comment. Bye.